What would you do if the very thing you built as your sanctuary was suddenly claimed by someone else? Someone who believed they had more right to it than you did. In Fresno, California, one man's peaceful retreat turned into the center of a neighborhood battle that spiraled so far out of control it drew the police, fractured friendships, and ultimately exposed just how dangerous unchecked entitlement can become. This isn't just a story about a pool. It's about a line in the sand. One man's refusal to surrender what was his, and one woman's determination to take it, no matter the cost. Stay with me because the ending will leave you questioning what community really means. It began on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day tailor-made for rest. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue that pressed down with a steady warmth, and the sweet scent of sunscreen mixed with freshly cut grass lingered in the air. Calvin Brewer, an IT systems manager who spent most of his week glued to glowing screens and endless troubleshooting calls, had finally allowed himself to exhale. He was settled deep into his lounge chair by the pool, a tall glass of iced tea sweating beside him. The water shimmered like liquid glass, perfectly balanced after his early morning cleaning ritual. For Calvin, this was more than a backyard feature. It was his sanctuary, his reward for grinding through long hours. But sanctuaries are fragile. They can be disturbed in an instant. It started with a knock. Not the light tap of a neighbor dropping by to borrow sugar, nor the cautious rap of a delivery driver. This knock was sharp, demanding, the kind of knock that announced, "I am owed your attention." Calvin frowned, set aside his glass, and slid his sandals on. The sound of the pool pump hummed steadily behind him as he walked toward the back door. When he swung it open, the sight that greeted him was Patricia Kincaid. Patricia was in her mid-50s. Her hair scraped so tightly into a bun it looked painful. A clipboard clutched under her arm like an extension of her own body. Her pressed slacks and floral blouse gave her the air of a woman perpetually ready for a meeting. She wasn't just Calvin's neighbor. She had styled herself as the de facto voice of the Homeowners Association, and she thrived on control. "Calvin," she said flatly, as though they were already mid-conversation, "we need to talk about your pool." Calvin raised an eyebrow. "My pool?" Without waiting to be invited closer, Patricia took a sharp step forward. "The neighborhood is planning our summer kickoff party. It's going to be wonderful. Food, music, families together. Naturally, it needs to be hosted here. You have the only pool big enough." First, Calvin laughed. He thought she was joking, but Patricia's face remained stone serious. "You want me to host a party?" he asked carefully. "Not host," she corrected briskly. "Just provide the pool. We'll handle everything else, decorations, food, drinks. All you need to do is open your gate. It's for the community." That phrasing unsettled him. "Let us in." The words made his skin prickle. "Patricia," Calvin said slowly, "that's not going to work. This is my family's pool. I put time and money into it. I don't feel comfortable with dozens of strangers swimming here." Patricia blinked as though the word no was foreign. Then her lips curled into a tight smile. "Oh, come now, Calvin. Don't be difficult. Everyone benefits when neighbors cooperate. It's only fair. And frankly, the board believes this would set the right tone for summer." Her tone wasn't a request. It was an expectation. But Calvin stood his ground. He crossed his arms, his voice even. "The answer's no." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the hum of the pump. Children's laughter floated faintly from down the street. But here in the driveway, the air thickened. Patricia's jaw tightened, her fingers whitening around her clipboard. "You're being very unneighborly," she snapped. "This isn't about you. It's about all of us." Calvin's patience thinned. "With respect, Patricia, this is my home, my pool, my responsibility. You don't get to decide what happens here." Her eyes narrowed. Then, with clipped words, she muttered, "We'll see about that." She turned sharply, her heels clicking against the concrete as she marched back down the driveway. Calvin watched her go, his peace shattered. He had the sinking feeling that the knock he had just answered wasn't the end of the matter. It was only the beginning of something much bigger, something he wasn't yet prepared for. Because Patricia Kincaid was not the kind of woman to accept defeat. And Calvin Brewer was about to discover how far she would go when someone dared to tell her no. But if Calvin thought that simple refusal was the end of it, he was wrong. Because Patricia wasn't coming back alone next time, and when she did, she would bring more than just her clipboard. She would bring an entire audience. Calvin tried to shake it off. He told himself Patricia's demand was just another one of her overreaches, the kind of thing neighbors whispered about when rolling their eyes behind closed doors. After all, Patricia had a reputation. She was the type to measure everyone's lawn height, to send friendly reminders about trash bins not being rolled in quickly enough. Surely, her obsession with the pool would fizzle out once reality set in. For the rest of that Saturday, Calvin attempted to reclaim his peace. He grilled a few burgers, splashed his feet in the water, even turned on some soft jazz to drown out his frustration. But every so often, his mind wandered back to the hard glint in Patricia's eyes as she said, "We'll see about that." It wasn't a bluff. It was a promise. By Sunday afternoon, the promise came knocking again. This time, Calvin wasn't alone. His younger sister, Dana, had dropped by with her 2 kids. The children shrieked with laughter as they tossed a beach ball back and forth, their voices carrying over the hum of cicadas. Calvin leaned against the deck railing, finally feeling some sense of normalcy return, until the sound of tires crunching against gravel pulled his attention to the street. Patricia's silver SUV rolled to a slow, deliberate stop in front of his driveway. The door opened, and out she stepped, crisp as ever. But she wasn't alone. From the passenger side emerged Leonard Cross, the HOA president. Leonard was a man who wore his title like a crown. Late 60s, retired accountant, with a permanent scowl that made him look like he'd smelled something sour decades ago and never recovered. His sport coat was a size too big, his tie slightly askew, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed his word was law. Calvin's stomach tightened. This wasn't a casual drop-in. This was an ambush. "Uncle Cal," Dana called, noticing his change in expression. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," he muttered, forcing a smile. "Just give me a sec." He walked down the driveway, each step heavy. The air seemed to thicken as Patricia and Leonard approached, their clipboards tucked under their arms like shields. "Calvin," Patricia greeted. Her smile stretched so tight it bordered on mockery. "I've brought Leonard so we can clear up this little misunderstanding." Leonard nodded curtly, his gaze sweeping over the backyard like a surveyor sizing up land he was about to seize. "Afternoon, Brewer. We need to discuss community expectations." Calvin crossed his arms. Community expectations? Or Patricia's expectations? Leonard's eyes narrowed, but Patricia jumped in smoothly. "The neighborhood has decided your pool is the ideal location for our summer kickoff event. We're prepared to handle the logistics, tables, chairs, refreshments. All we require is your cooperation." The word "require" landed like a gavel. Calvin's jaw tightened. "I already said no. This is private property, not a community center." Patricia tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "Calvin, no one's trying to take your pool. We're just asking you to share, for the good of the neighborhood. It's selfish to keep it locked away when everyone else could benefit." Dana, who had wandered closer, overheard and bristled. "Excuse me? My brother pays the mortgage. He maintains that pool. Nobody else lifted a finger for it. How is it selfish to use what's his?" Patricia's lips thinned. Leonard cleared his throat, stepping forward like a judge ready to pass sentence. "Brewer, let me be blunt. The HOA board believes participation in community events is essential. It reflects unity, cooperation. If you choose to isolate yourself, it creates division, and division undermines property values." There it was, the HOA trump card. Property values. The word hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Calvin's patience frayed. "With all due respect, Leonard, I work hard to maintain my home. My pool isn't lowering anyone's property value. And I sure as hell won't let strangers trample through my yard because Patricia thinks it's fair." Dana smirked. "Sounds like bullying to me." Patricia's cheeks flushed pink. "This isn't bullying. This is about community spirit. Why can't you just cooperate? Calvin let out a slow breath. He wanted to keep his voice steady, but anger sharpened it. Because it's mine. I didn't build it for the neighborhood. I built it for my family. And that's the end of it. Silence. Then Leonard leaned in, his voice dropping low. Be careful, Brewer. Refusal to participate doesn't look good on record. The board takes note of these things. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. A chill ran through Calvin. The implication was clear: punishment, fines, harassment, endless violations stacked up until he caved. This wasn't about unity. It was about control. Dana stepped between them, fire in her eyes. Are you threatening him? Because it sounds like you're threatening him. Leonard straightened, feigning indignation. Merely advising him of consequences. Nothing more. Patricia placed a hand on Leonard's arm, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We'll give you time to reconsider, Calvin. The party is in 2 weeks. I'll expect your answer by Friday. She turned briskly, Leonard following. As they climbed into the SUV, Patricia's window rolled down. She leaned out, her eyes locking with Calvin's. You don't want to be the reason this neighborhood falls apart, she said coldly. Think about that. The SUV pulled away, its tires crunching like the grinding of teeth. Dana exhaled sharply. What the hell was that? They can't force you into this. Calvin rubbed his temples, watching the vehicle disappear. His sanctuary no longer felt safe. The pool shimmered behind him, but instead of calming, it looked vulnerable, like a prize everyone else believed they had a claim to. He muttered under his breath, They're not going to stop, are they? Dana shook her head grimly. No. People like Patricia never stop until they get what they want. And Calvin knew she was right. Patricia had declared war, and Leonard had given her an army. What Calvin didn't know yet was just how far Patricia would escalate this battle. Because the next move wouldn't be a knock or a warning. It would be a spectacle, one designed to humiliate him in front of everyone. The days after Patricia's second visit dragged with a heaviness Calvin couldn't shake. Every time he walked past his pool, the water no longer sparkled with invitation. Instead, it reflected unease, like a mirror of the battle brewing just beneath the surface. Dana checked in often, offering reassurances, but Calvin could feel the neighborhood shifting. People who once waved from their porches now gave him curt nods or avoided eye contact altogether. Conversations hushed when he walked by. Patricia's words, "You don't want to be the reason this neighborhood falls apart," had spread like poison, and now he was the contaminant. By Thursday, Calvin began to suspect Patricia wasn't simply talking. She was organizing. The confirmation came Saturday morning. It started with music. At first faint, then swelling louder until it echoed down the block. A jaunty playlist of summer hits, the kind played at block parties and barbecues. Calvin, sipping coffee on his deck, frowned. The sound wasn't coming from a single house. It was centralized, amplified, almost as if it had been staged. He set his mug down and followed the noise. Halfway down the street, he saw them. A cluster of neighbors gathered on Patricia's front lawn. Tables had been set up with pitchers of lemonade and trays of cookies. Balloons swayed lazily in the breeze. And at the center stood Patricia, beaming like a queen addressing her court. Leonard hovered beside her, clipboard in hand, as though keeping official record of the spectacle. Calvin's pulse quickened. This wasn't a casual gathering. This was theater. Patricia spotted him and, with a flourish, raised her voice so it carried. "Ah, neighbors, speak of the devil. Calvin Brewer has joined us." Dozens of eyes turned his way. Some smiled awkwardly, others smirked knowingly. Calvin felt the heat of their scrutiny. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice cautious. Patricia clasped her hands together. "Oh, just a little community spirit rally. We felt it was time to celebrate our neighborhood's unity, to remind ourselves of what it means to live in harmony." Her words dripped with implication. Calvin folded his arms, unwilling to play along. "And what does that have to do with me?" Leonard stepped forward, clearing his throat theatrically. "As most of you know, we've been planning our annual summer kickoff. Traditionally, we rotate venues, front yards, cul-de-sacs, the community hall. But this year, he paused for effect, gesturing grandly toward Calvin. We had the chance to do something truly special. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Patricia's smile widened. That's right, she said brightly. We proposed hosting it at Calvin's beautiful pool. A perfect setting for laughter, swimming, and togetherness. A chance for our children to make memories. But unfortunately, she allowed her tone to dip, just slightly. Calvin declined, gasped, mutters. The performance was flawless. Patricia the benevolent leader, Calvin the selfish holdout. Calvin felt his chest tighten. You're twisting this. I didn't decline community. I said no to turning my private backyard into a public free-for-all. Patricia's eyes glistened, as if wounded by his words. No one's asking for a free-for-all. We're asking for generosity, for kindness, for the willingness to share. A woman from the crowd piped up. But my kids were so excited when they heard it might be at your pool. Another man shook his head. Doesn't seem fair, Brewer. We'd all pitch in. You wouldn't be alone in it. Calvin opened his mouth to reply, but Patricia cut him off with a practiced sigh. It's not about fairness. Some people just value their privacy more than their neighbors. The crowd stirred. Whispers swelled into a chorus. Selfish, standoffish, always keeping to himself. Dana, who had been watching from Calvin's porch, stormed down the sidewalk. This is ridiculous, she snapped, planting herself at his side. You all realize you're being manipulated, right? Patricia doesn't care about unity. She cares about control. And Leonard's backing her up because he thinks the HOA owns us. A hush fell. Eyes darted between Dana and Patricia, waiting for the counterstrike. Patricia's smile never faltered, but her tone sharpened. Dana, dear, no one's manipulating anyone. We're simply highlighting an opportunity that Calvin has chosen to deny. The choice is his. But so are the consequences. Consequences, Dana repeated, incredulous. Leonard raised his clipboard. We've already had neighbors volunteer to draft a petition. If a majority supports using the pool, the HOA can formally revisit property use guidelines. We're not here to fight. We're here to vote. Applause broke out. Patricia's eyes glittered with victory. Calvin felt his stomach drop. They were turning his neighbors into a jury, and Patricia had stacked the deck. This wasn't persuasion, it was public shaming dressed as democracy. He tried to steady his voice. You can't vote away private ownership. This is my home, my pool. You don't get to decide how I use it. But his words were swallowed by chatter, by clapping, by Patricia's soothing calls for civility. Dana tugged his arm. Come on, Cal. Don't give her the spectacle she wants. Reluctantly, he turned back toward his house. Behind him, Patricia's voice rang out like a bell. See, neighbors? We'll give Calvin until Friday to reconsider. If he won't act for the good of the community, then the community will act for itself. The crowd cheered. Calvin's steps were heavy, his heart pounding. He had always thought of his home as his refuge. But now it felt like a stage, and Patricia had cast him as the villain. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Patricia wasn't just pushing for access to his pool. She was building momentum, rallying an army. And once she had them all in her grip, she wouldn't stop at summer parties. She wanted control, and control demanded conquest. Calvin thought he had faced the worst of Patricia's schemes. But Patricia's next move wouldn't be rallies or petitions. It would be something far more personal, an attack designed to invade the very walls of his sanctuary. Calvin barely slept after the so-called community spirit rally. Even inside his own house, he could feel the neighborhood's eyes on him. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside his window carried suspicion, as if the walls had turned porous and gossip was seeping through. Dana urged him to document everything. If Patricia and Leonard try to file something official, you'll need proof. But Calvin knew Patricia wasn't interested in paperwork. She thrived on spectacle, and her next performance would be staged not on a lawn or a sidewalk, but inside the sanctuary he thought was untouchable. It began subtly. On Tuesday morning, Calvin found his trash cans overturned, their contents spilling across the driveway. At first he assumed it was raccoons, until he saw the lids stacked neatly against his garage door. Raccoons didn't tidy up. People did. That night, his sprinkler system mysteriously activated at 2 a.m., drenching the yard. The control panel, locked in a shed, showed no errors. Someone had bypassed it. By Thursday, it was undeniable. Dana arrived to find "Pool for All" painted in chalk across Calvin's front walk. The letters were bright, bold, and mocking. Neighbors walked by, some chuckling, others pretending not to see. Patricia's handwriting? Maybe. Or maybe one of her new loyalists. Calvin's anger flared. This is harassment. Pure and simple. But Patricia played innocent. When confronted, she tilted her head, smile as sharp as glass. "Oh, Calvin, children play with chalk all the time. You can't control everything on a public sidewalk. Perhaps if you were more welcoming, they wouldn't feel the need to express themselves." Dana nearly lunged at her, but Calvin pulled her back. Confrontation only fed Patricia's theatrics. Still, the tension gnawed at him. He double-checked locks, installed cameras, even left lights burning through the night. Yet somehow Patricia always stayed one step ahead. The footage captured shadows, hints of figures, but never clear faces. Whoever was helping her knew the blind spots. Friday evening brought the breaking point. Calvin returned from work to find his back gate ajar. His stomach tightened as he rushed into the yard. The pool shimmered under the fading light, but it wasn't empty. Floating lazily on the surface were dozens of plastic toys. Beach balls, inflatable animals, water noodles. A scene of chaos, as if a party had erupted in his absence. On the patio, someone had left a plate of half-eaten cookies and a paper cup of lemonade. Calvin's hands shook as he scanned the yard. No one remained, just evidence taunting him. He stormed to Patricia's door. She answered almost immediately, as though she'd been waiting. "Evening, Calvin," she purred. "You crossed a line," he snapped. "Someone broke into my yard. Dumped junk into my pool. This isn't a game anymore." Patricia's eyes sparkled with false sympathy. "Oh, how awful. But really, Cal, are you certain it wasn't Dana? She's quite spirited, isn't she?" Maybe she thought lightening the mood would help. The accusation blindsided him. "Don't you dare." Patricia shrugged. "Well, if it wasn't her, perhaps some of the neighborhood children snuck in. You know how curious kids can be." But then again, her voice dipped into a conspiratorial whisper. "If your pool were open to everyone, you wouldn't have to worry about these little misunderstandings. They'd be parties, not intrusions." Calvin's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to scream, but he saw Leonard's curtain twitch across the street. Neighbors were watching. Patricia had engineered this moment. He forced himself to turn away, muttering, "This isn't over." As he walked back, Patricia called sweetly after him, loud enough for the block to hear. "We're all just waiting for you to realize, Calvin, the community is bigger than you." That night, sleep abandoned him again. He sat by the window, staring at the pool glinting in the moonlight. What unnerved him wasn't just the invasion, but the precision. Patricia wasn't vandalizing at random. She was dismantling his sanctuary piece by piece, eroding the boundaries between his home and their demands. Dana placed a hand on his shoulder. "She's trying to break you down, make you doubt yourself. Don't let her." But Calvin already felt the cracks forming. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he could win. Patricia wasn't simply after his pool. She was after his peace of mind. And she was succeeding. The next morning, a letter slid under his door. No envelope, no stamp. Just a single sheet of paper, scrawled in neat, deliberate script. "One way or another, the pool will be ours. Consider this your final chance to cooperate." Calvin's blood ran cold. Patricia had stopped hiding behind charm and community spirit. Now she was declaring war. Calvin thought sabotage was Patricia's endgame, but he was wrong. What came next would be a direct assault, not on his property, but on his character, designed to make the entire neighborhood turn against him once and for all. By Saturday morning, Calvin's home was no longer just a house. It was a fortress under siege. He checked locks 3 times, glanced at cameras every hour, and felt his stomach coil each time footsteps crunched the gravel outside. The anonymous note still sat on his kitchen counter, its sharp message echoing louder than any threat Patricia had yet delivered. But Calvin soon realized the invasion wasn't limited to his property. Patricia's new weapon wasn't chalk, toys, or gates left ajar. It was something far more insidious: reputation. It began with whispers. At the local cafe, where Calvin grabbed his Saturday coffee, he felt the stares before he even reached the counter. Conversations hushed, then resumed in fragments that floated just loud enough for him to catch. Heard he screamed at Patricia. Something about scaring children? Dana's worried too, isn't she? Poor girl. Calvin's jaw tightened. He ordered quickly, his voice clipped, and left without looking anyone in the eye. By the time he returned home, Dana was waiting with a folded flyer in her hand. This was in the mailbox. It was a neatly printed sheet, the kind Patricia would produce with her ever-present clipboard and laser printer. The headline read, "Is our neighborhood safe? Concerns about Calvin Brewer." Beneath it were bullet points, half-truths twisted into sinister implications, aggressive outbursts toward fellow residents, refusal to cooperate with community efforts, possible hostility toward neighborhood children. Each claim was vague and signed, but crafted to plant seeds of doubt. "They're accusing you of being dangerous," Dana said, voice trembling with fury. "This is slander." Calvin's chest burned. This is Patricia. And Patricia wasn't done. On Monday, Calvin's supervisor pulled him aside at work. "Listen, Brewer, I got a strange call. A woman from your neighborhood. She suggested you were unstable, that there might be police involvement. I don't usually entertain gossip, but what's going on?" Calvin's stomach dropped. Patricia had reached into his professional life. He explained quickly, trying to sound composed, but his boss's concerned frown lingered. That evening, Dana found a post on the neighborhood's private Facebook group. A grainy, zoomed-in image of Calvin standing in his driveway, arms crossed, expression stern. The caption read, "This is the face of intimidation. Should one man's temper endanger our community's peace?" The comments poured in, some cautious, some openly hostile. Neighbors Calvin had barely spoken to suddenly had opinions. "I've seen him glare at my kids. Always so unfriendly. If Patricia says there's a problem, I believe her." Only a handful defended him. Most stayed silent, unwilling to cross Patricia. Calvin scrolled, fury mounting. "She's painting me as a monster, and people are eating it up." Dana gripped his arm. "Then fight back. Show them who you really are." But fighting back wasn't so simple. Patricia controlled the narrative. She had Leonard by her side, the HOA board in her pocket, and a growing circle of residents who found it easier to nod along than question her. The climax came during a Tuesday evening HOA meeting. Calvin arrived determined to defend himself. Dana insisted on coming, though he worried she'd only become another target. The community center buzzed with chatter as they entered. Heads turned. Conversations stalled. At the front sat Patricia, her clipboard poised like a judge's gavel, Leonard flanking her with folded arms. Patricia began smoothly, her voice practiced. "Before we proceed with regular business, I must address a matter of grave concern. The conduct of Mr. Calvin Brewer." Gasps and murmurs rippled. Calvin felt the spotlight sear him. Patricia continued, feigning reluctance. "Several residents have reported troubling behavior, verbal aggression, hostility toward children, refusal to cooperate with community events. I've even received calls from parents worried about their safety when walking past his home." "That's a lie," Calvin burst out. Patricia's eyes glittered. "Please, Calvin, don't prove my point by yelling." The room chuckled uneasily. The trap had sprung. Calvin forced his voice calm. "None of this is true. I've been harassed, my property vandalized, my privacy invaded. Patricia is orchestrating this. She wants my pool, and she'll tear me down to get it." Patricia clutched her chest, mock wounded. Such accusations, when all I've done is advocate for unity. She turned to the room. Neighbors, who would you rather believe? One man who isolates himself, or the voices of an entire community? A few nodded. Others avoided Calvin's eyes. Leonard smirked. Dana stood, her voice sharp. This is bullying, plain and simple. Patricia doesn't want unity. She wants control. And you're all letting her destroy someone's life for her own ego. But Patricia only smiled sweetly, letting Dana's words hang in the air. She didn't need to argue anymore. The seed of doubt had been sown, watered, and rooted. Calvin was the villain now. As they left, whispers chased them down the hall. Dangerous. Unstable. Poor Patricia. Dealing with that. Outside, Calvin clenched his fists, staring up at the night sky. Patricia had taken the fight beyond his property. She had stolen his peace, his reputation, and was now threatening his future. And the neighborhood? They weren't just spectators anymore. They were accomplices. But Patricia hadn't anticipated one thing, that Calvin wasn't entirely alone. Because while she spread her lies, someone else had been quietly watching, collecting their own kind of evidence. And soon, the truth would start fighting back. Calvin had never felt so small inside his own neighborhood. Walking the streets, he felt eyes tracking him from behind curtains. When he mowed the lawn, phones angled just slightly in his direction, as if waiting for him to snap. The smear campaign was working, but Patricia hadn't counted on everyone being fooled. It began with a knock at his door late Wednesday evening. Calvin hesitated. After weeks of torment, knocks meant trouble. But Dana urged him on, standing close behind as he opened it. On the porch stood Mr. Alvarado, the retired high school teacher who lived 2 houses down. A quiet man, always tending to his roses, rarely joining HOA politics. His hands were clasped nervously around a manila folder. Mr. Brewer, Alvarado said softly, I think it's time we talked. Calvin stepped aside, wary. Dana gestured him in. They sat at the kitchen table, the faint buzz of the security cameras filling the silence. Alvarado slid the folder forward. Inside were printed photographs, timestamps neatly noted, and screenshots of posts from the neighborhood Facebook group. I've been documenting Patricia, Alvarado said, for months, long before she started targeting you. Calvin blinked. Why? The old man sighed. Because I've seen this before. Different targets, same tactics. Patricia thrives on control. She pushes, manipulates, makes herself the victim, and the board folds every time. I've watched her drive out 3 families in 5 years. And now, she's chosen you. Dana leaned forward. You mean this isn't just about the pool? Alvarado shook his head. The pool is the excuse. The game is power. Always has been. He spread the photos across the table. There was Patricia chalking messages outside another neighbor's house late at night. Patricia slipping flyers into mailboxes. Patricia whispering to Leonard in the community center parking lot, clipboard in hand. The timestamps were damning. Many contradicted her public stories. Then came the screenshots. Anonymous posts smearing residents. Yet the phrasing, the word choices, were identical to Patricia's emails. Unity, safety, concern for the children, her signature vocabulary. Calvin's pulse quickened. This could prove everything. Alvarado nodded slowly. If the neighborhood will listen. Patricia has a grip on them, but cracks are showing. People have grown tired of her crusades. You just need to shine a light. Dana touched Calvin's hand. This is it. This is how we fight back. For the first time in weeks, Calvin felt something stir inside him, hope, fragile but burning. Still, fear gnawed at the edges. She'll come after you, Alvarado. If she finds out you're helping me. The old man's lips curved into a grim smile. She already came after me, years ago. Said I was creepy, for handing out candy on Halloween. Parents stopped bringing their kids. My wife begged me to let it go. I did. And I've regretted it ever since. His eyes hardened. I won't regret it again. The next step came quickly. On Thursday, Alvarado arranged a small gathering, unofficial off the record, at his home. Just a few neighbors. Patricia hadn't completely locked under her spell. Calvin attended reluctantly, Dana at his side. There, in Alvarado's living room, they laid out the evidence. The photographs, the screenshots, the pattern of Patricia's manipulation. At first, skepticism reigned. Patricia wouldn't. She's just strict. Maybe she means well. But as the evidence mounted, murmurs shifted. Uneasy glances were exchanged. One neighbor admitted she'd been pressured into filing a complaint against Calvin she never wanted to sign. Another revealed Patricia had hinted their HOA fees might increase if they didn't support her motions. The web was unraveling. Dana's voice cut through the noise. She calls it unity. But look around, are we united? Or are we all scared of the same woman? Silence. Then slowly nods. For the first time, Calvin wasn't alone in the fight. But Patricia wasn't blind. The very next day, Calvin found a fresh note tucked beneath his windshield wiper. Rats abandon ship first. I know who's talking. You'll regret this. His stomach turned cold. Patricia had caught wind of the rebellion. And if she was dangerous before, now she would be merciless. That night, Dana urged him to stay calm. This is proof we're getting to her. She's scared. But Calvin saw something else in the sharp, scrawled letters of the note. Not fear, but fury. Patricia's mask of sweet, civic concern was slipping. And when it finally fell, everyone would see what lay beneath. Because Patricia wasn't about to lose control quietly. If Calvin and Alvarado thought evidence and truth would be enough, they were about to learn. Patricia was ready to escalate the war into something far more dangerous. The first strike came on a Sunday morning. Calvin woke to the sound of shouting outside. When he rushed to the window, he saw 3 neighbors gathered at his curb, waving copies of what looked like official notices. Dana pulled one from their mailbox. It was a flyer, bold letters screaming across the top. Warning. Dangerous property. Unsafe conditions. Below, a grainy photo of his pool, warped and oversaturated to look green and murky, as if filled with algae. The text accused him of negligence, claiming the pool was a public health hazard and breeding ground for disease. At the bottom, reported by concerned neighbors, pending HOA action. Patricia's handiwork. Undeniably, Calvin's gut twisted. She's trying to make it look like I'm poisoning the neighborhood. Dana crumpled the flyer. This isn't just gossip anymore. She's manufacturing evidence. But Patricia wasn't content with paper. By nightfall, Calvin's security lights flickered off inexplicably, plunging his backyard into darkness. When he reviewed the camera footage, he found the wires had been slashed cleanly, deliberately. She wants me blind, he muttered, staring at the static. Dana put a hand on his arm. And she wants you scared. The next evening it got worse. Calvin returned from work to find a trail of muddy footprints leading from the sidewalk straight up to his back gate. His stomach clenched as he unlocked it. Inside, the pool was coated with a slick layer of soap bubbles. Dozens of empty detergent bottles littered the patio. The water frothed like a cauldron, pumps groaning under the strain. Dana gasped. She's sabotaging your property, Calvin. This isn't just intimidation. It's destruction. Calvin's voice was tight with fury. And she wants me to react. To lose my temper in front of everyone. They drained the mess late into the night, exhaustion dragging at their bones. All the while, Calvin felt the invisible eyes of the neighborhood on him. Watching. Waiting. By midweek, Patricia escalated again. She staged her own scene. As Calvin pulled into his driveway one evening, he spotted her standing in the middle of the street with a group of supporters, all holding candles as though at a vigil. A hand-painted sign read, "Justice for our children. Stop unsafe pool practices." Patricia's voice carried through the dusk. "We will not allow negligence to threaten our families. This isn't about one man. It's about the safety of us all." Neighbors peeked from doorways. Some nodded, others frowned in discomfort. Calvin gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. It was theater, public humiliation dressed as community concern. Dana whispered. She's turning this into a crusade. But Patricia wasn't done. That weekend, Alvarado called Calvin urgently. Come to my house. Now. Inside, the old man had his laptop open. A live feed pulled from a hidden camera he'd placed facing Patricia's garage weeks earlier. The footage showed Patricia unloading boxes from her car. Flyers, props, and something far more sinister. A folder thick with documents stamped with fake HOA seals. She's forging official notices, Alvarado said grimly. If she gets these into enough mailboxes, the neighborhood will believe you're under investigation. They'll turn on you completely. Calvin's stomach churned. She's manufacturing a reality that doesn't exist. Alvarado leaned in. Then you have to expose her before she cements it. If she controls the story, you're finished. But Patricia seemed to sense the walls closing in. That night, Calvin heard a sound outside. A soft scrape against glass. He crept to the back window and froze. Etched into the condensation with a finger was a single word. Traitor. Dana's voice trembled. She was here. She was right here. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was invasion. Patricia had stepped across the invisible line that separated harassment from something far darker. The next morning, Calvin found another note in his mailbox. This one wasn't written on paper. It was carved into a piece of wood. Letters jagged and raw. We will drown you out. He stared at it, heart hammering, realizing the metaphor had shifted. This wasn't about sharing water anymore. Patricia was threatening to flood his life until nothing of him remained. Dana whispered. She's unraveling. She knows she's losing control. But Calvin felt no comfort. Because when someone like Patricia started to unravel, she didn't collapse quietly. She exploded, dragging everyone around her into the fire. The neighborhood wasn't just divided anymore. It was becoming dangerous. And Patricia's next move wouldn't be hidden in shadows or whispered behind doors. It would be public, violent, and impossible to ignore, forcing Calvin into a confrontation that would decide who truly controlled the neighborhood. The storm broke on a Thursday evening. The HOA had called an emergency meeting in the community center. Patricia's doing, of course. Flyers had gone out claiming the agenda was public safety violations and removal vote. Everyone knew who the target was. Calvin considered not going. His stomach churned, his hands shook. Dana squeezed his arm. If you don't show, she wins without a fight. So they went. The community center buzzed with tension. Folding chairs packed wall to wall. At the front stood Patricia, perfectly composed, pearls gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Leonard hovered beside her with a clipboard, ready to back her every word. When Calvin entered, a ripple moved through the room. Some neighbors whispered. Others avoided his eyes. Patricia's smile sharpened. Thank you all for coming, she began, voice syrupy yet edged with steel. We are here to address a grave danger to our community. Mr. Brewer's reckless disregard for safety. Murmurs of agreement, nods, her loyal circle. Patricia gestured, and Leonard held up glossy photos of Calvin's pool. Photos digitally altered, water darkened, filters applied to exaggerate every speck. Gasps rippled through the room. This, Patricia declared, is what our children are exposed to. Do we want disease festering at the heart of our neighborhood? Do we want negligence threatening our unity? Applause broke out from her supporters. Calvin's chest tightened. The room was tilting against him. Then Dana stood. Her voice rang clear. Those photos are fake. Patricia altered them. And we can prove it. Heads turned. Alvarado stepped forward from the back, carrying his folder. Calm, steady, teacher-like. Neighbors, you've been deceived. For years, I have documented Patricia's activities. Her flyers, her anonymous smears, even her trespassing. Gasps again, sharper this time. Patricia's mask faltered. Lies, she hissed. Baseless lies. But Alvarado laid the photos on a table. Real ones, time-stamped, showing Patricia chalking hateful messages outside homes, slipping forged notices into mailboxes. He projected screenshots onto the wall. Patricia's anonymous posts, identical in phrasing to her HOA emails. The evidence spread like wildfire through the room. Whispers turned to shock. Shock to anger. "Is this true?" someone shouted. "She forged HOA letters? She tried the same thing with us." The crowd began to fracture. The once solid wall of Patricia's control splintering. Patricia's composure cracked. Her voice rose shrill. "Don't you see? He's manipulating you. He's dangerous. You're all blind." She slammed a fist onto the podium, startling even her supporters. The pearls around her neck trembled. "I built this neighborhood. Without me, it falls apart." But the spell had broken. People were no longer nodding. They were recoiling. Calvin, heart pounding, forced himself to stand. His voice wavered at first, then strengthened. "For weeks, I've been afraid to step outside, afraid to wave at my neighbors, afraid that every whisper was another lie about me. But I'm done being afraid. Patricia wants us divided. She calls it unity, but it's control. Tonight you saw the truth. And the truth is, this neighborhood isn't hers. It's ours." Silence fell. The weight of his words lingered. Then slowly applause began. Not polite, powerful. One clap, then another, until it swelled into a roar. Patricia's face drained of color. She looked around, desperate for support. But her allies lowered their eyes, unwilling to defend her now. Leonard set his clipboard down quietly and stepped back. "Traitors," she spat. "All of you." But the room had turned. The HOA chair, normally cowed by Patricia, rose stiffly. "Patricia, until further notice, you are suspended from all board activities. Effective immediately." The final blow. Patricia's lips trembled. For a moment, Calvin thought she might lunge at him, clawing and shrieking. But instead, she gathered her papers with shaking hands, pearls rattling, and stormed out, the door slamming behind her like a gunshot. The neighborhood exhaled as one. Dana squeezed Calvin's hand, tears in her eyes. "It's over. You did it." But Calvin only nodded slowly, because as much as relief coursed through him, he knew Patricia wasn't the type to disappear quietly. Somewhere in the dark, she was already plotting her return. For now, though, for tonight, the neighborhood was free. And Calvin had reclaimed not just his reputation, but his place in the community. No longer the villain, no longer the victim. For the first time in months, he felt like himself again.